The courtroom is one of those rare places in America where silence can feel louder than words. Every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen phrase has weight. But on this day, that silence was shattered, not by chaos, not by shouting, but by one justice who refused to let shaky narratives go unchallenged. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to ever serve on the United States Supreme Court, sat listening intently. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett, known for her fiery presence and sharp arguments, took the floor. The atmosphere was thick with expectation. Political pundits had been buzzing about Crockett's boldness, her ability to command attention, and the likelihood that she would dominate the conversation. Cameras were rolling. The public was watching. But what unfolded was far different than anyone anticipated. Justice Jackson interrupted Crockett, not once, not twice, but 7 separate times. Each interruption cut sharper than the last, peeling back layers of assumption, rhetoric, and performance. And then came the 8th point, a statement so precise, so undeniable, that the entire courtroom shifted. Observers say you could feel the air leave the room. Why does this matter? Because this wasn't just a clash of personalities. It wasn't just a headline about 2 women making waves in a political and legal arena dominated for centuries by men. This moment illuminated something much deeper, the battle between confidence and clarity, between performance and preparation, between fiction and fact. And here's the truth. You need to know this story because it's not just about them, it's about us. In politics, in law, and in everyday life, we are constantly bombarded with confident voices. People who sound sure of themselves, people who deliver talking points with unwavering energy, often convince audiences before anyone stops to ask, but is it true? That is the beating heart of this moment. Justice Jackson showed us that facts wielded with precision can slice through noise like a scalpel through fabric. Crockett brought her trademark fire, but Jackson brought receipts, and that made all the difference. As one observer summarized it best, in a world full of confident fiction, it only takes one person with facts to change everything. That's the promise of this story. In the next hour, we'll walk through, not just what happened, but why it matters, and why you should care. Because if democracy is about anything, it's about truth, and truth only survives when someone is willing to defend it. Let's rewind. This wasn't just any legal hearing. The backdrop was a politically charged issue, already dividing the nation. Commentators across the spectrum were poised to dissect every word spoken that day. Some expected fireworks. Others expected a routine session with rehearsed statements and predictable soundbites. Instead, what they got was a masterclass in judicial reasoning and a humbling reminder that courtroom rules differ sharply from cable news debates. Here, every word must withstand scrutiny. Here, evidence reigns supreme. Jasmine Crockett walked into that chamber with a reputation, bold, unflinching, and unafraid to go toe-to-toe with anyone who dared challenge her. That confidence has served her well in political theatre, where strong delivery often matters more than airtight reasoning. Many in the audience assumed she would dominate this exchange as well. But if Crockett thrives in the arena of political spectacle, Justice Jackson thrives in the arena of truth, and when those two worlds collided, the results were unforgettable. Now you might be wondering, why should I care about one heated exchange in one courtroom? Here's why. Because this wasn't just a personal clash. It was a spotlight moment revealing the wider struggle happening in our society every single day. The struggle between narrative and fact. The struggle between spectacle and substance. The struggle between talking points and truth. This story matters because it mirrors our own experiences. How many times have you seen misinformation spread faster than facts on social media? How many times have you watched a confident speaker convince a room even when you knew what they were saying wasn't right? Moments like this remind us that confidence without truth is hollow, and that the courage to speak facts, even in the face of overwhelming noise, still holds the power to shock a room into silence. By the end of this deep dive, you'll understand what led to this extraordinary exchange. How Justice Jackson methodically dismantled each weak point. One interruption at a time. Why Crockett's arguments resonated with some but fell apart under scrutiny. how the public, the media, and even fellow lawmakers responded in real time. And most importantly, what this teaches us about truth democracy and the importance of preparation in an age of spin. This isn't just about courtroom drama, it's about the principles that hold a nation together. Observers describe the tension like a tightening rope. With each interruption, Jackson wasn't simply cutting off Crockett for the sake of control. She was clarifying, redirecting and fact-checking in real time. Crockett, known for her verbal agility, kept pressing forward, but the more she pushed, the more Jackson's calm, surgical precision exposed the cracks. By the seventh interruption, the room was buzzing. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras captured every flicker of expression. It was more than a clash. It was a slow-motion train of rhetoric, meeting the immovable wall of logic. And then came the eighth point, a statement so carefully constructed, so irrefutably grounded, that it didn't just end the exchange, it redefined it. Crockett wasn't silenced by force, she was silenced by truth. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence itself told the story. Stick with me because this story is about to take you deep inside that moment. You'll see the lead up the told. Confrontation, the aftermath, and the bigger picture that ripples far beyond this one courtroom. By the end, you'll walk away with more than just a headline. You'll walk away with perspective. Perspective on why facts still matter, why preparation beats confidence, and why democracy depends on ordinary people being willing to defend the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because here's the reality. This isn't the last time you'll see a clash like this. In politics, in media, in your workplace, maybe even in your own family gatherings, you will encounter someone armed with confidence, but lacking facts. And in those moments, what will you do? That's the challenge this story leaves us with. And it's the reason we need to dive in together. So let's start from the beginning. Every major confrontation begins long before the first words are spoken. To understand why the exchange between Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and Representative Jasmine Crockett carried so much weight, we need to rewind to the environment. The expectations and the subtle build-up that made this moment not just possible but inevitable. The truth is, this wasn't just about two powerful women crossing paths. It was about what each of them represented to the public. Crockett, the firebrand, Jackson, the fact-checker. And between them, an America caught between spectacle and substance. The setting was charged before the doors even opened. Across the nation. Conversations were already polarized. On one side, Crockett's supporters praised her as the voice of the people, fearless, outspoken, unwilling to bow to elite institutions. On the other, Jackson's admirers saw her as the embodiment of judicial rigor, a woman who had worked her way through the ranks with undeniable qualifications and an iron grip on the law media outlets, had framed the upcoming hearing in dramatic terms. Headlines used words like showdown, clash, and battle of wits. Television analysts speculated on whether Crockett's charisma could outshine Jackson's precision. Social media lit up with predictions, memes, and a sense that something big was about to happen. In short, the stage wasn't just set. It was primed. To understand the build-up, you need to know Jasmine Crockett's style. She's not afraid of confrontation. In fact, she thrives on it. Her speeches are laced with sharp one-liners designed to stick in headlines. Her delivery is rapid, passionate, and full of conviction. This approach works wonders in political arenas where emotion often sways more than evidence. In front of a crowd or on camera, Crockett knows how to dominate airtime. She walks in with confidence that borders on defiance, often daring anyone to cut her off, and in most settings people don't. That confidence had won her legions of supporters. But in a courtroom environment where precision is prized above volume, that same approach risked running into a wall. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is cut from a different cloth. Every question she asks, every point she raises carries the weight of meticulous preparation. Her background as a public defender, judge, and now Supreme Court justice has forged a style that is calm yet unyielding. She doesn't rely on verbal fireworks to make her point. She relies on facts, on careful logic, on structures of argument, so sound they leave no cracks for escape. So while Crockett walked into the room with fire, Jackson walked in with steel observers, noted that Jackson sat quietly as proceedings began, jotting notes, waiting. But those who know her style recognized the signs she was listening for the precise moment to intervene. She wasn't going to speak unless it mattered, and when she did, she would make it count. What added more fuel to this build-up was the broader cultural tension surrounding the exchange. This wasn't just about two individuals. It was about narratives Americans have wrestled with for years. Does confidence outweigh competence? Can passion substitute for preparation? Do people value spectacle more than substance? In a society saturated with soundbee, tease and social media hot takes, Crockett embodied the bold, performative style that thrives in those spaces. Jackson, on the other hand, represented the slower, steadier approach, fact-based, often less flashy but enduring. Everyone watching, whether consciously or not, saw themselves reflected in this struggle. From the start of the proceedings, Crockett leaned into her strength, commanding the room with emotion. Her voice rose and fell with practiced rhythm, her hand gestures punctuating every point. The cameras loved it. Some in the audience nodded, swept up by the energy. But not everyone. Jackson remained still, expression measured, pen tapping lightly against her notebook. When Crockett made her first sweeping claim, one that sounded persuasive but lacked grounding, Jackson's brow lifted almost imperceptibly. For those who caught it, it was the first signal she wasn't going to let this slide. Each time Crockett pressed forward, stretching a point into rhetoric. Jackson's eyes sharpened, and while the room focused on the speaker, some could sense the storm brewing in silence. Here's what made this build-up so compelling. Each woman wasn't just speaking for herself. She was carrying larger narratives on her shoulders. Crockett represented the frustration of ordinary citizens who feel that passion is the only way to cut through bureaucracy and injustice. She embodied anger, urgency, and the belief that sometimes rules need to be bent to make progress. Jackson represented the faith in institutions, the belief that truth, evidence and procedure still matter, that even in a noisy age order and preparation can't be discarded. So when they finally collided, it wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Outside the courtroom, expectations only added more tension. Cable news personalities framed the event as a clash of titans. Social media accounts live tweeted every detail, priming audiences to expect a viral moment. Some predicted Crockett would dominate simply by refusing to be silenced. Others argued Jackson would expose the weakness in Crockett's arguments. Both sides braced for victory. But what no one quite predicted was just how surgical Jackson would be in dismantling each weak point, nor how Crockett would double down with fire, refusing to concede, even as the cracks became clear. By the time Crockett launched into her extended remarks, the room was thick with expectation. Every camera lens, every journalist's pen, every pair of eyes seemed locked in anticipation of a flashpoint. And Crockett delivered, at least at first. Her words soared with emotion, framing herself as the fighter for the people, the one unafraid to challenge the system. Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the room. But for all her confidence, her claims began to stretch thin. Numbers cited without clear sources, assertions framed as facts, but lacking foundation, rhetoric that sounded convincing, but wavered under scrutiny. And that's when Justice Jackson leaned forward. The tension had built to the breaking point. Crockett was in full stride, her confidence peaking. The audience was caught between admiration and unease, torn between the fire of her delivery and the fragility of her foundation. Jackson set down her pen, lifted her gaze, and prepared to speak. Those who know her style recognized the signal immediately. The confrontation was about to begin. The calm before the storm was over. The room was already humming with tension when Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson finally leaned forward. She had sat in silence as Representative Jasmine Crockett delivered her fiery remarks, her pen scratching notes as Crockett's voice rose, dropped and cut through the chamber. The Congresswoman's energy was undeniable. She had the rhythm of a practiced speaker, the cadence of someone who knew how to make a headline. But this wasn't a campaign rally. This was the courtroom. And just as Jackson was about to remind everyone of that, Crockett had just made a sweeping statement about constitutional interpretation, framing it as if centuries of precedent bent in her direction. The crowd leaned in, some nodding, some frowning. Then calmly, almost softly, Jackson cut in. "Representative? Can you point to the case law that supports that interpretation?" The room stilled. Crockett blinked momentarily, thrown off rhythm. She attempted to recover with a broad reference, but Jackson pressed again, this time firmer. "Which case? Please be specific." It was the first crack in Crockett's armor. The Congresswoman pivoted, trying to steer back to rhetoric, but Jackson had set the tone. This wasn't a stage for speeches. It was a stage for facts. Moments later, Crockett tried again, asserting that the court has consistently recognized a particular principle. Jackson raised her hand slightly. "Consistently recognized." "I'll need you to clarify, because in Smith v. United States, the court ruled otherwise. Are you familiar with that precedent?" The sharpness of the citation landed like a hammer. Crockett shifted in her seat, adjusting her papers. For those watching closely, it was clear Jackson wasn't interrupting for dominance. She was interrupting to expose weak foundations. Crockett pressed forward undeterred. Her words came faster now, the fire still burning, but as she rattled off a statistic, Jackson interjected. "Representative, the figure you've cited is not reflected in the Congressional Research Service report filed just last month. Do you have a source beyond secondary commentary?" The courtroom murmured. Jackson had just fact-checked Crockett in real time. The cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face as she searched her notes. This wasn't spectacle, it was surgical dismantling. At this point, Crockett attempted to seize back momentum by raising her voice, painting the moment as a battle between the people and the establishment. Jackson didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly, voice steady. "Representative, I'm asking about the legal framework, not political framing, if you could answer directly." It was like watching a boxer cut off the ring, forcing the opponent into a corner. Crockett's narrative, so strong in the world of politics, was crumbling under the precision of judicial discipline. Crockett, visibly frustrated, accused the court of ignoring plain constitutional language. Jackson's pen tapped once on her notepad before she spoke. "Respectfully, Representative, the court has not ignored the text. In fact, in Jones, 5th Mississippi, we engaged directly with the language you're referring to. Did you have a different interpretation of that ruling?" The citation wasn't just a correction. It was a line in the sand. Crockett had wandered into Jackson's terrain, and the justice was reminding her this was her arena. By now, Crockett's pace had quickened, her sentences rushing, as though speed could outpace scrutiny. She invoked historical examples, loosely suggesting broad trends in constitutional history. Jackson's voice cut in. Calm, steady, unshaken. "History is important." "Yes. But are you suggesting the founders endorsed your reading, or are you projecting modern interpretation onto historical text? Please clarify." It was devastating. Crockett's appeal to history collapsed under the weight of that simple surgical question. Crockett launched into what she framed as her strongest point, that recent court decisions proved a clear bias. Her voice rose, her passion undeniable. She declared it boldly, looking directly at the cameras. Jackson didn't let it pass. Representative bias is a serious charge. If you are alleging institutional bias, can you provide documented evidence from the record? Not opinion, but evidence. The air thickened. That word evidence hung like a challenge. Crockett faltered. She shifted in her chair, regrouping, pressing forward with emotional appeals instead of direct answers, and that's when the room realized Crockett's confidence had met its limit. Then came the moment that stunned the courtroom. See. Crockett, undeterred, pushed forward one last time, her voice rising with indignation. She insisted that her position reflected the unquestionable will of the people, declaring it as if it were beyond debate. Justice Jackson leaned forward, her voice measured, her words precise. Representative democracy is not built on unquestionable claims, it is built on accountability. The will of the people is expressed through law precedent and constitutional process. If your argument cannot withstand factual scrutiny, then it is not strengthened by volume. The silence that followed was absolute. No murmurs, no scribbling pens, no shifting chairs, just silence. Crockett opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time in the exchange, she had no immediate comeback. And in that silence the power shifted, not through force, not through theatrics, but through truth. Observers later said, it was like watching a balloon deflate. Crockett's fire hadn't disappeared. It was still there, but it no longer filled the room. Jackson's calm authority had anchored the space. Some in the audience looked stunned. Others nodded quietly, as if recognizing the inevitability of what had just unfolded. Reporters scribbled furiously, aware they had just witnessed the headline moment. It wasn't that Crockett had been humiliated. It was that she had been outmatched, not in passion, but in preparation. Almost immediately, clips of the exchange began circulating. On social media, the interruptions became markers of turning points. People clipped them into first strike, second strike, and so on. By the 8th point, hashtags were trending. Supporters of Crockett praised her courage, her refusal to back down. But even many of them admitted Jackson's mastery of fact and precedent was unshakable. Supporters of Jackson celebrated the moment as a victory for truth over rhetoric, for facts over spectacle. The confrontation wasn't just a clash. It became a symbol. The significance of the confrontation wasn't just in its drama, it was in what it revealed. That confidence, no matter how powerful, can falter when pressed by fact. That preparation and precision can cut through noise. That in an age of viral spectacle, truth can still command silence. Justice Jackson didn't win because she was louder. She won because she was right, and she could prove it. And that is why the 8th point didn't just interrupt Crockett. It shocked the court. The silence after Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's 8th and final point lingered like a shadow. The exchange was over, but the impact was only beginning. Within minutes, reactions began rippling through the courtroom into the press gallery and out into the wider world. What had just unfolded was no longer just a legal exchange. It was a story destined to dominate headlines, ignite debates, and draw lines between those who valued spectacle and those who valued substance. Even before Crockett and Jackson left their seats, the atmosphere in the chamber had changed. Observers who had been leaning forward during Crockett's fiery delivery now sat back, processing what they had witnessed. Court staffers exchanged quick glances. Journalists scribbled their final notes, aware that they had just captured a career-defining moment for both women. The rhythm of Crockett's speeches, which had once filled the air with confidence, now seemed like echoes fading against the precision of Jackson's facts. For Crockett, the silence was heavy. She was not embarrassed. Her resolve remained, but the shift was undeniable. For Jackson, the silence was victory, but not the kind won with applause. It was the quiet respect commanded when truth leaves no room for rebuttal. As the first reports hit the airwaves, two narratives quickly crystallized. The Jackson narrative. Outlets focused on Jackson's composure and the power of her fact-based interventions. Headlines read, Justice Jackson dismantles Crockett point. By point and facts over fire, Jackson redefines the courtroom showdown. The Crockett narrative. Others emphasized Crockett. T's boldness, framing her as a fighter who refused to yield even in the face of judicial authority. Headlines here read, Crockett stands her ground against justice, or Crockett challenges, the court unbowed. Unafraid. Cable news ran split screens replaying the key interruptions, particularly the 8th point. Analysts debated whether Crockett had been silenced or whether she had stood tall despite being cornered. The spin depended entirely on which channel you were watching. On social media, the aftermath was instant and electric. Clips of each interruption were cut, captioned, and shared with hashtags like Jackson vs. Crockett, 8th Point, and Facts Matter. Supporters of Jackson circulated memes showing a scoreboard with 7 interruptions leading to the 8th knockout. Supporters of Crockett reframed the moment as David versus Goliath, painting her as the lone voice standing against an institution unwilling to bend. TikTok creators added dramatic music to Jackson's 8th point, turning it into a viral soundbite. Twitter, or X users, debated whether Crockett's confidence had been courage or recklessness. Instagram Reels split the screen, showing Crockett's passion on one side and Jackson's calm rebuttal on the other. The court's official transcript wasn't even released yet, but the digital verdict was already being delivered in real time. For Jasmine Crockett, the immediate aftermath was a mixed bag. Politically, her base rallied. Many supporters argued that she had spoken truth to power, regardless of whether every detail was perfectly sourced. The fire of her delivery resonated emotionally with those already aligned with her message. Reputationally, however, cracks appeared. Critics accused her of leaning too heavily on performance and not enough on preparation. Some moderates who had admired her boldness began questioning whether passion without grounding could ever succeed in serious legal debate. Crockett's communications team quickly moved into damage control, issuing statements emphasizing her courage, her refusal to be intimidated, and her commitment to fighting for the people's voice. But no amount of spin could erase the moment Jackson's words had left her silent. For Justice Jackson, the aftermath was one of reinforcement. In the media, she was hailed as the embodiment of judicial clarity, someone unwilling to let rhetoric overpower reason. Among legal professionals, the moment was praised as a reminder of what judicial rigor should look like, a demand for evidence, a refusal to accept half-truths, and an insistence that arguments withstand scrutiny. But Jackson also faced criticism from some circles. Detractors claimed she had been overly aggressive in interrupting Crockett 7 times. Some argued she had crossed from judicial inquiry into personal confrontation. Yet for most observers, the precision of her corrections overshadowed the criticisms. As with many high-profile moments, the public split sharply. Group A, the spectacle defenders. These were people who saw Crockett's passion as the main takeaway. To them, facts mattered less than the courage it took to speak boldly against authority. They admired her fire, even if her points were shaky. Group B, the substance champions. These were people who celebrated Jackson's cool surgical dismantling. To them, the moment proved that in a world full of loud voices, facts still hold the ultimate power. Polls conducted in the days that followed reflected this divide. Both women saw surges in attention, but Jackson's favorability rose significantly among independents and moderates, while Crockett's base doubled down in their support. Political analysts dissected the exchange endlessly. Some pointed to Crockett's missteps as evidence that modern politicians often value virality over veracity. Others highlighted Jackson's style as a model of how leaders should engage with misinformation, not with anger, but with calm, unyielding fact-checking. Legal scholars chimed in. Too many praised Jackson's 8th point as a defining articulation of democracy. Attic principles that claims must withstand scrutiny, and that law not volume defines the will of the people. Meanwhile, communication experts studied the clash as a case study in rhetorical styles. Crockett's passion versus Jackson's precision became a classroom example of why substance often outlasts spectacle. Within 48 hours, the narrative had shifted from a fiery exchange to a defining clash of styles. Commentators across platforms began using the confrontation as shorthand for a larger cultural debate. Do we want leaders who sound strong, or leaders who are strong because they're grounded in fact? The viral nature of the 8th point gave it a life beyond the courtroom. It became a metaphor invoked in discussions far removed from the original hearing debates about misinformation, online disputes in workplaces, even casual conversations about politics at the dinner table. Beyond facts and analysis, the immediate aftermath also carried an emotional undercurrent. For Crockett's supporters, There was frustration, even anger, that passion seemed to be dismissed by the establishment. To them, Jackson's precision felt cold, detached, even elitist. They framed the exchange as yet another example of institutions silencing the people's voice. For Jackson's supporters, there was relief that in a time of noise, someone had reminded the nation that truth still matters. Her calmness was seen not as coldness, but as strength. And caught between these two reactions were millions of Americans who simply felt conflicted, impressed by Crockett's courage, but convinced by Jackson's clarity. The immediate aftermath didn't end with reactions and headlines. It planted seeds for a larger debate that would grow in the weeks to come. Should public figures be celebrated for passion alone? Do institutions still have the credibility to demand facts over rhetoric? Can democracy survive if confidence is mistaken for truth? The eighth point may have ended the exchange in the courtroom, but in the real world, it was just the beginning. The confrontation between Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and Representative Jasmine Crockett may have ended in silence, but its echoes stretched far beyond the courtroom. What unfolded wasn't just a heated exchange between two powerful figures. It was a window into something larger, a struggle that touches every citizen, every institution, and every democracy, fighting to survive in an age of noise. Because here's the truth. This wasn't really about Jackson or Crockett. It was about us. Every day we are bombarded with voices that sound confident. Politicians, pundits, influencers, people who can deliver lines with polish and conviction, often shape public opinion before anyone stops to ask. But is it true? That's what made this moment so powerful. Crockett brought passion, no doubt. She spoke with fire, with conviction, with the kind of certainty that can sway audiences in political arenas. But Jackson reminded us of something essential. Passion without truth can only carry you so far. Her interruptions weren't about silencing, they were about anchoring. Each one pulled the conversation back to the only foundation that matters. In a democracy, facts. We live in a world that often rewards performance over preparation. A viral clip, a sharp soundbite, or a dramatic gesture can travel further than a well-researched argument. But Jackson's eighth point cut through that illusion. Her calm, prepared, fact-based approach outlasted Crockett's volume. It proved a timeless principle. Confidence convinces for a moment. Preparation convinces for a lifetime. This isn't just true in courtrooms. It's true in classrooms, in boardrooms, on social media, even around dinner tables. When the noise fades, it's the truth that remains standing. In that single sentence, democracy is not built on unquestionable claims. It is built on accountability. Jackson crystallized a principle bigger than the clash itself. Rhetoric can inspire and passion see, and ignite movements, but unchecked rhetoric untested by fact is dangerous. History is full of examples where powerful speakers swayed nations with half-truths or outright lies, and each time the cost was devastating. Facts are not glamorous. They don't always go viral. They don't always spark applause, but they are the bedrock of justice, the scaffolding of democracy, the thread that holds truth together in a storm of fiction. That is why Jackson's insistence on evidence, on precedent, on grounding arguments in reality was more than just a courtroom move. It was a defense of democracy itself. It's easy to watch this exchange as entertainment, another clip in the endless stream of political drama, but that would miss the point. This wasn't entertainment. It was a warning, a reminder, a challenge, because every one of us faces our own version of this clash. Maybe not in a courtroom, maybe not with cameras rolling, but in everyday life. When a co-worker shares misinformation at the office, when a relative repeats a conspiracy theory at the dinner table, when a viral post tempts us to hit share before asking if it's true. In those moments we have a choice. Stay silent and let confident fiction spread, or step forward with facts, with preparation, and with the courage to defend truth. That's what Jackson modeled in that chamber, and that's what democracy requires of us. The climax of this story is the reminder that democracy is fragile. It does not run on autopilot. It survives only when ordinary people, teachers, parents, students, workers, choose to defend truth over fiction, facts over spin substance, over spectacle. Justice Jackson reminded us that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it interrupts. Sometimes it corrects. Sometimes it quietly demands evidence when the room is full of noise. And when it does, everything changes. As the custom quote says, "Democracy isn't a spectator sport. It survives only when ordinary people openly defend the truth." That's the lesson we cannot afford to forget. We've walked through the build-up. We've dissected the confrontation. We've traced the aftermath and seen why it all matters. But now comes the most important part where you enter the story. This isn't just about Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. It isn't just about Representative Jasmine Crockett. It's about you, me, and every single person living in a democracy that depends on truth to survive. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone spoke with absolute confidence, even though you knew what they were saying wasn't quite right? Maybe it was a co-worker rattling off statistics that didn't add up. Maybe it was a family member at a holiday dinner swearing by something they read on Facebook. Maybe it was a politician, a pastor, a boss, or even a friend, delivering words with such certainty that questioning them felt almost impossible. What did you do? Did you stay quiet? Let the moment pass and tell yourself it wasn't worth the argument? Or did you step in, ask questions, and risk the awkward silence that follows when facts hit harder than fiction? That's what this story is really about. You don't need to be sitting in a Supreme Court chamber to experience what Crockett and Jackson lived out. Every day, we're surrounded by voices on social media, on the news, at work, in our communities where confidence takes the spotlight. Think about the last time you scrolled through your feed. How many posts went viral because they sounded strong, bold, or emotional, without anyone pausing to verify if they were true? How often do likes and shares reward passion over accuracy? That's the Crockett style. And let's be honest, it's powerful. It feels good to hear someone say what we want to hear with conviction. It feels good to believe our emotions are enough. But then there's the Jackson style, calm, prepared, fact-based. It doesn't always go viral. It doesn't always feel exciting, but it lasts. It holds. It grounds us in reality, even when reality is harder to swallow than a fiery soundbite. And the question is, which style are we rewarding in our own lives? Here's where you come in. Democracy doesn't just happen in courtrooms. It happens in everyday conversations, millions of small moments where truth either gets defended or ignored. When you challenge misinformation, you're defending democracy. When you choose facts over spin, you're strengthening democracy. When you prepare instead of just performing, you're modeling the very thing Jackson showed us. It doesn't mean you have to interrupt people 7 times in a row. It doesn't mean you have to memorize court cases or statistics. It means you have to care enough to ask questions, to pause before sharing, to dig one layer deeper than the headline. Because every time you do, you're playing your part in this story. So let me ask you directly, when was the last time you believed something just because it was said with confidence? Have you ever shared a post online only to later realize it wasn't true? How often do you reward passion, even if it's not backed up by facts? And most importantly, the next time you hear confident fiction, will you have the courage to defend the truth? These aren't just rhetorical questions. I want you to think about them. Better yet, drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your stories. Because this isn't a lecture, it's a conversation. And your voice matters here. This clash between spectacle and substance doesn't just play out in politics. You see it in business when a flashy pitch wins the room, even though the numbers don't add up. You see it in education when students bluff their way through an answer instead of admitting they don't know. You see it in media where sensationalism grabs attention while sober reporting gets ignored. And yes, you see it in families, friendships and communities where myths and rumors spread faster than the truth. If you've ever felt frustrated watching misinformation spread, this story should encourage you, because it proves something important. Facts still have power. They may not shout the loudest, but when they're spoken clearly and courageously, they can still shock a room into silence. This is why I want you to engage with this story. Comment, share, debate. Don't just consume it and move on. Because the whole point of Jackson's 8th point, the reason it shook the room, is that democracy requires participation. It's not enough for a justice to defend truth in a courtroom. It's not enough for a representative to argue passionately in chambers. It takes ordinary people like you willing to step into the conversation to defend facts, to demand evidence, to call out confident fiction when you see it. That's how democracy survives. Not by silence, not by passivity, but by participation. So, as you finish this story, ask yourself, where in my own life am I tempted to reward confidence over truth? Who in my circle needs me to speak up when fiction gets passed off as fact? How can I practice the kind of preparation that outlasts performance and then take action? Maybe it's as simple as pausing before sharing that viral post. Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting. Maybe it's asking a gentle but firm question at the dinner table. Those small acts might not trend on Twitter. They might not feel as exciting as a viral clip, but they matter. They are the everyday defenses of democracy. Justice Jackson shocked the courtroom, not because she was loud, but because she was grounded. She proved that facts can still silence fiction. The real question is, what will you do the next time? Confident fiction comes knocking at your door. Will you let it pass? Or will you be the one who speaks with truth? That's where this story connects to you, and that's why it matters. We began with a simple scene. A justice, a representative, and a clash that left a courtroom stunned. Along the way, we traced every interruption, every response, every ripple effect, and what we discovered is bigger than any single exchange. Because this wasn't just about Ketanji Brown Jackson correcting Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't just about 1/8 point. Not that silenced a chamber. It was about a principle that should guide every democracy. Truth outlasts noise. Think back on what we've witnessed. Confidence is powerful, but it's not enough. Crockett's words carried fire, but fire without foundation burns out. Preparation is stronger than performance. Jackson's calm reliance on precedent and evidence proved that facts always have the final word. Democracy depends on participation. Whether in courtrooms or conversations, it is ordinary people defending truth that keeps the system alive. That's the thread weaving through this entire story. It's not just a political clash. It's a mirror held up to our own lives, reminding us that we too will face moments where truth is tested by confident fiction. This matters because misinformation isn't going away. If anything, it's growing louder, faster, and more convincing every day. We live in an age where a polished soundbite can spread across the world in seconds, while a careful fact-check might never leave the margins. But the story of Jackson and Crockett proves that truth still has teeth. It shows us that facts, when spoken with courage, can cut through the noise, and it challenges us to do the same, not just online, not just in politics, but in every corner of our lives. So here's my challenge to you. Don't let this story stop at entertainment. Carry it into your own conversations. The next time someone delivers confident fiction, be ready with truth. The next time a headline feels too perfect to be real, pause and verify. The next time silence feels easier, remember that silence is how misinformation wins. And if this story sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Comment with your thoughts. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you can stay connected to stories that matter. Because the truth is, we can't afford to tune out. Not now, not ever. So let's end with this. In the end, democracy doesn't defend itself. That's our job. The question is, will you be ready when your moment comes?